In 2024, the Minnesota Vikings face a very uncertain future. With their NFC North rivals generating hype and high expectations, the Vikings have been largely expected to finish in last place. The Vikings finally allowed the Kirk Cousins era to end and made JJ McCarthy the highest drafted quarterback in team history. Whether the plan was to sit him as a rookie or not, the decision was made for them when JJ hurt his knee in his preseason debut, and he will not play at all in his rookie season. Of course, that means the Vikings are now counting on Sam Darnold to lead a team that has a very interesting roster build at this stage. The Vikings are certainly in rebuild mode given how strong the NFC North is, but this is not a typical rebuild quality roster. Most rebuilding teams aren't going to have 2 franchise caliber tackles and the best receiver in football. The Vikings have a lot of work to do, but there are pieces in place, which has always kept them from really embracing a full-on rebuild. I'll be doing my rebuild of the Minnesota Vikings today from start to finish, and we start with Sam Darnold as this team's starting quarterback. We don't have the luxury of developing JJ as a rookie and trying to get him to be Rookie of the Year. How does his injury and Darnold being the starter affect the route this team goes on? We know we've got a 25-year-old Justin Jefferson, and you want to build that winner while you've got a player of his caliber. And thankfully, the Vikings have already gone ahead and extended Jefferson. The Vikings haven't drafted very well since the 2017 season when they made their NFC Championship game run, but they have drafted the likes of Justin Jefferson and Christian Darrisaw, along with Jordan Addison, who had a promising rookie year. The Vikings' offense is mostly in good shape, and you could easily expect this unit to put up good numbers, even with Sam Darnold as the starting quarterback. Where the issues have really hit this team hardest, though, are on the defensive side, where they went from having the best defense in 2017 to a completely depleted unit that is just now starting to look up again because Kirk Cousins isn't getting paid, and they instead invested heavily in free agency. Whether they spent that money well or not remains to be seen, but they brought in Jonathan Grenard coming off his breakout season. They also moved up in the draft to take Dallas Turner, who many had as the #1 defensive player in the most recent draft. The Vikings' pass rush has struggled. They moved on from Danielle Hunter and immediately replaced him. They also made a deal to bring in Andrew Van Ginkel from the Miami Dolphins, giving them a lot more edge depth and presence than they've had in recent seasons. Minnesota's defense doesn't have a lot of star power these days, but it could be on the rise again thanks to moves like this. Blake Cashman was brought in to be a solid starting linebacker, a 3-down guy that can play next to Ivan Pace, a great find for the Vikings last year in undrafted free agency. He's already been more successful than the majority of their defensive picks the last 6 or 7 years. Stephon Gilmore is actually one of the Vikings' most recent additions, and even if he's not as good as he once was, he's good enough for this team. And then you've got the hitman, Harrison Smith, the longest tenured Viking, one of the best safeties of the past decade, and a future Ring of Honor player for Minnesota. And he's one of my favorite Vikings of all time. A Vikings rebuild is really interesting because you're given a lot of intriguing high-quality players, and it creates a sense of urgency to try and build that winner while you still have those players. NFL rosters age very quickly, and when it comes to Madden, players don't often like to re-sign with losing teams. For this rebuild, I have kept Kevin O'Connell as the head coach, but I have upped the free agent motivation impact to very high. This makes retaining your players and signing free agents tough when you're not a successful organization. I've also turned the staff talent cost modifier to slow. I have no progressive fatigue. I don't like the feature very much. And I have also kept this on default XP sliders. With that, let's go through our journey of rebuilding the Minnesota Vikings. Right off the bat, this is a huge negative. You do not have a full slate of draft picks with Minnesota. In real life, they're counting on some compensatory picks. They don't have that in Madden. So no third or fourth round pick. My thought going into year one was that players such as Aaron Jones or Stephon Gilmore could be used to rebuild that draft capital if the team wasn't very good at the trade deadline. I actually had a really hard time deciding on my focus players because the Vikings don't have that many high upside young players, and I can't put extra development on JJ McCarthy, so I ended up with Dallas Turner, Ivan Pace, and Jordan Addison. Right off the bat, the Vikings win their first game against the New York Giants, but in the process do have a couple more injuries, including a pretty serious one to Andrew Van Ginkel. This was a pretty good game for Sam Darnold as the Vikings shut down the Daniel Jones-led Giants offense. All three of the Vikings' big additions at edge rusher got sacks. Minnesota would then pull off the upset against San Francisco, again playing really good defense, but now against one of the better offenses in the NFL. I knew the defense would be a bit of a wild card with how many new players there were in place, and the Vikings opened the season 3-0 with quality wins against the 49ers and the Texans. Maybe this defense was going to be the real deal after all. The Vikings' first loss wouldn't come until week 4 against Green Bay. And that's a Green Bay team without Jordan Love. I recorded this part of the rebuild, by the way, before any actual games were played this year. The Vikings lose with a big game from Josh Jacobs and Michael Pratt leading Green Bay to a win. We would go into our bye week with a 4-1 record leading the NFC North. Not what I expected in our first 5 games of the year. Minnesota gets the better of Aaron Rodgers as Sam Darnold has a 4-touchdown, 3-interception day with Justin Jefferson going off. The first milestone in this rebuild was to see where we'd be at that first trade deadline, and with a 4-2 record, that is not a record you sell with. And I like to treat my rebuilds and franchises with some degree of realism, so I wasn't going to be selling if this team was in such a good position playing this well offensively, with some very high quality wins in the first 6 games as well. We wouldn't be buyers nor sellers at the trade deadline, so Aaron Jones, Stephon Gilmore, those guys would remain on the roster, but there was still a good chance to get some deals done with players interested in re-signing. So we start off in the secondary with Cameron Bynum, a really solid safety who's developed well for Minnesota over recent years, along with Byron Murphy, who's only 26 and an 80 overall with star development. Neither contract was very big. We come out of the trade deadline then, face the undefeated LA Rams, and lose by 7. Was a very strong game for Matthew Stafford, 335 yards, no turnovers for him, but the Vikings would then bounce back, winning their next 3 games and dominating the Tennessee Titans. They had a good day again offensively, but a pick 6 from Stephon Gilmore and a safety from Dallas Turner really turned this into a lopsided game. The Vikings would be 10-5 going into their final 2 games, as we did battle through some injuries this year with Van Ginkel, Jordan Addison, Josh Metellus had gotten injured, but the Vikings would ultimately win the NFC North with an 11-6 record, never falling off from that good 4-2 start. I did not see us starting this rebuild as the 2-seed team. We did lose linebacker Blake Cashman late in the year and sign Camu Grugier-Hale just because he was with the Vikings in training camp. Sam Darnold, 34 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. With the best situation he's had to start in, he put up very good production. Now, would that affect my plans with him going forward along with JJ? You'll see soon. Aaron Jones, 1,300 plus yards, plenty of gas in the tank after leaving Green Bay. Justin Jefferson has a 1,400 yard season, 16 touchdowns. The Viking defense then did not generate a ton of sacks overall. Dallas Turner had 5 and Ginkel 7.5, but 19 interceptions, 5 of those to Harrison Smith, 5 of those to Stephon Gilmore. This was as good of a year as you honestly could have hoped from the Vikings. A very surprising breakout year. In this season, we did get some more development for guys like Jordan Addison, but the offense has so many guys that are veterans that more of the development happened on defense, with Cam Bynum going up a little bit more, Dallas Turner having that star dev revealed. But this gave us a wild card playoff matchup, third meeting of the year against the Detroit Lions. Vikings' first playoff game since losing to Daniel Jones and the Giants, and the Vikings lay an egg, barely avoiding the shutout at the very end and dropping this game to Detroit 24-6, bringing our first year to an end. It was a great year for Sam Darnold, and he did get some development out of it at the same time, but that would lead us into the offseason then with some big decisions to make. Detroit was just a much better team here in the wild card round, and they would ultimately go on to the Super Bowl and fall short to the Cincinnati Bengals 26-20. It was time to look ahead to our first offseason of the rebuild. The Vikings, because of being a playoff team, would now pick a lot later than expected with the number 24 selection. Harrison Smith then retired, giving us another player to potentially replace, while only having 2 selections in the top 100. I was not content with this draft capital. I was able to now spend the coach points to upgrade Kevin O'Connell and unlock 2 more additional focus player slots. When it came to re-signing, a lot of players didn't want to return, but we were able to get a couple deals done. One I didn't expect was to bring back Stephon Gilmore, because now he viewed the Vikings as a winning team, with Kevin O'Connell having a good career win percentage. So Gilmore returns ultimately, but we do not extend or sign Sam Darnold at all. The plan does not change. I looked ahead to the draft after spending a lot of our scouting resources on defense. This team has lacked star power on that side for a number of years with an aging roster. I wanted to get this rebuild started with an impact defensive player. Of course, with top 5 talent, I really like Spencer Youngblood, but assumed he'd be well out of range, projected to go at 15, 9 spots ahead of us. This was now our time to build around JJ McCarthy. He didn't get any development as a rookie, and how would that throw things off? At least he held on to his star development. He is 22 years old. Age is one of the most important factors in developing players in Madden, so we would need to really take advantage of his age 22 season. And going into the offseason, I wanted to strengthen the offensive line and try to get as many quality upgrades on defense as possible. This team didn't have anybody above a star development, no 90-plus overall players on defense. And when we got to free agency, a lot of players immediately not interested in Minnesota for a variety of reasons. But I did have a few targets in mind. Jauan Jennings, wide receiver from San Francisco, was one of them. I offered him a 1-year deal. We also offered a contract to guard James Daniels, who would be an easy upgrade for this interior. 10 teams, though, were trying to bring him in. I put out a very competitive offer, and then I offered to Dayo Odenigbo, a 25-year-old defensive lineman that I thought still had some development ahead of him and would upgrade our defensive line. I'm still interested in normal dev players when they can start and they're still in their mid-20s. So, free agency was not splashy. We signed Elijah Mitchell to be a plug-and-play running back, Jauan Jennings, and we bring back Harrison Phillips. We missed out on James Daniels, but did bring in Matt Hennessy along with Odenigbo. All of this cost us around $50 million in cap space. We had a lot more than that to work with, but most of the big-name free agents weren't interested in us, and I had to pick my top 5 free agents pretty carefully there. So I focused on players that were more realistic to sign. This gave us some decent upgrades. The Jauan Jennings move, though, was not for us to add a number 3 receiver. I wanted to add somebody because I intended to trade away Jordan Addison. This team needs more draft capital. With Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson on the team, I felt like this was a way for us to get some more valuable selections. Spencer Youngblood was now being projected to go at 18, a little bit closer to our selection at 24. Now, what was the trade market like for Jordan Addison? It was lighter than I thought. I expected for an 85 overall, 23-year-old receiver that I could get a first-round pick potentially, but a mid-first-round pick was certainly not going to happen. The Raiders were not at all interested for 18 overall. The Chargers weren't even close for 21. But overall, I'm happy with the deal that I did end up doing. We trade Jordan Addison to the New England Patriots for 34 and 98, giving us 2 more top 100 picks and 1 very close to the first round. And that would give us a lot more to work with and make it easier to navigate up and down the board. Having a 1, 2, and a 5 was not very comfortable. This was a much better situation. 24 and 34 gave us a starting point to try and rebuild this team and find some players to build around. I was focused on that number 18 selection, and Spencer Youngblood did not go in the first 17 picks. I wanted to move up. And I ultimately did get a deal done with the Raiders. And what we do is move up in the first round, move back in the second round with that Patriots selection, and then throw in a 5. But that gets us up to number 18. And that allows us to take our first player of the rebuild. It's top 5 talent, Spencer Youngblood. This defense has needed that standout corner they haven't had since the days of Xavier Rhodes and even Terrence Newman playing great in 2017. Youngblood, third and true talent, hidden development, great athlete, 6'3". That's exactly how I wanted to open. So from there, I would have 50, 56, and 98 to work with to continue adding to this core. On to the second round, where I had a lot of corners and linebackers on the board. A couple of those linebackers stood out. Ben Compton, round 1 to 2 talent, that's better than his projection. At this point, I just wanted to get really good value on defense and high upside players. Compton does have hidden development, but didn't project to be a good coverage player. Maybe that could be developed. We then picked 6 selections later, and while I considered some offensive linemen, Isaiah Beckham to me was the best player available, who did have A awareness and B zone coverage. And while it might not be the best team building strategy to go back-to-back linebackers, I felt like I was getting really good players. Ultimately, both had hidden development, and both would have a chance to play immediately. After taking 3 defensive players, we finally addressed the offensive line and select Cameron Peake. Was hoping there'd be a chance at him being able to replace Garrett Bradbury one day. So here is the overall draft class in year 1. I was happy with it because of the big defensive upgrades. To go get a number 1 caliber corner where we did in the draft is a huge boost. And I know linebacker is not the flashiest, most important position, but I wanted to get good players regardless of position. This defense has just needed that top talent. And fortunately, I was able to get 2 players that had hidden development. They had different skill sets at the same time. Beckham more your prototypical 3-down linebacker. But those were the only picks that I felt like were going to make a big impact. And it's hard to get impact picks in the 4th through 7th round these days, so we do add depth at least at center, and then at running back with the selection of Roman Truman. Then I came back to select wide receiver Jimmy Smart from Nebraska, who would give us some more depth after trading away Jordan Addison, and we rounded out with a guard in James Hills. Even if we can just solve a couple backup spots, that at least keeps us from dedicating cap space to those positions. Then we go to free agency and we bring in the mentor, Andy Dalton, to help out the development of JJ McCarthy. How would this go after missing his rookie year? In most of my Madden rebuilds, you take that quarterback and play him as much as you can immediately. But this was going to be a different challenge. And at the same time now, with some new young players on defense, I felt like this might be a difficult second year, but one where we can hopefully develop a lot of the roster. Defensively, I did want to play Compton, Beckham, Youngblood a lot immediately, while Josh Metellus would take over as the starting strong safety. And I had also picked up Neville Gallimore to be a starting defensive lineman. And that would be our roster going into year 2. JJ McCarthy's first career game was an overtime loss to the Lions. He didn't play great, with 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and completing under 60% of his passes. The defense got off to a good start this year with a pick 6 from Stephon Gilmore, and then 2 sacks for Neville Gallimore and 1 for Andrew Van Ginkel. The Vikings' first win with JJ McCarthy would come in Week 3 against the Green Bay Packers in a 31-25 game when he outdueled Jordan Love, throwing 4 touchdowns, 2 of those going to Justin Jefferson, the others going to TJ Hawkinson. Rookie linebacker Isaiah Beckham would collect his first interception in this game, and Dio Odenbo would pick up a sack. The Vikings would not have the same start we had back in year 1, going 3-4 without back-to-back wins in the first 7 weeks. This gave me a different approach to the trade deadline. I was actually willing to trade away some players this time around. In those first 7 games, JJ McCarthy, 15 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. The numbers look pretty good for a first-year starter. He was already up 3 overall to a 74. The running game was taking a big step back, with Elijah Mitchell taking over for Aaron Jones, while Juwan Jennings was doing a pretty good job of replacing Jordan Addison along with Jalen Naylor. Hawkinson's production was pretty low. Stephon Gilmore, 3 interceptions. Dio Odenbo led the team in sacks. As I looked at our options for making some trades, this one stood out to me, as it is tough to develop running backs in Madden when you're not taking them early in the draft. Tyjae Spears to me was really intriguing, given he was only 24 years old with star development. He has pass-catching ability, so I jumped on that opportunity and traded Andrew Van Ginkel for Tyjae Spears and a 4th-round pick from Tennessee. Now, that was the only trade I made, as I did want to see if we could turn this around, and thankfully, we did, going to 7-5 by our Week 13 bye, again leading the NFC North, which had not been as strong as I expected in this rebuild. JJ had a huge day against Joe Burrow and the Bengals with 5 touchdown passes. He spread the football around, not just going to Justin Jefferson, but getting TJ Hawkinson over 100 yards and 2 scores going to Jalen Naylor. Spencer Youngblood in this game had a pick and 12 tackles at that cornerback position. We now had the staff points to look at some more upgrades, and I decided to go with the running portion for our OC, and this was to give Tyjae Spears a bit of a boost to try to get this run game better. Now, after our bye, we slipped in 2 out of our next 3 games, losing to Kansas City 34-26. 3 picks in this game for JJ McCarthy. That isn't great. And our late season slide had us at risk of missing the postseason entirely. We'd go into Week 18 with an 8-8 record facing the Green Bay Packers, and the Vikings would win that game 17-13, earning a playoff berth for the 2nd straight year, but now as the 7-seed wildcard team. We had put up pretty good numbers offensively. The defense gave up a ton of points. We had a negative point differential, but still we had made it back. And JJ McCarthy did have a really good rookie year, and this was massive to see him go from a 71 to a true 82 overall. 39 touchdowns, nearly 4,000 yards. Everything was on track despite him missing his rookie year. Meanwhile, Sam Darnold had led the league in interceptions, now with the Rams. Tyjae Spears, not quite 1,000 yards on the ground, but I felt like he developed well from 79 to 83, was still only 24 years old. And Juwan Jennings, 1,000 yards on the year, sufficiently replacing Jordan Addison. And we still developed JJ well, still got back to the postseason. That was a risk that I felt paid off for us, especially considering that allowed us to go and get Spencer Youngblood, who had 4 interceptions, along with 99 tackles on this season. We again took away the football quite a bit, and our sack leader was Dayo Odenbo. That turned into a really good signing for us. He went up to a 77 overall, still at just 25 years old. Even more good news as Spencer Youngblood does take home Defensive Rookie of the Year. JJ McCarthy was already ranked the 5th best quarterback in the NFC. This felt like a success from year 1 to season 2. Youngblood had star development, Rookie of the Year would bring him up to superstar, and the 2 linebackers I selected also had star. So back we go to the wild card round to face the Detroit Lions, but now with JJ McCarthy at the helm. This would be a little bit different game as Detroit got off to a strong start, but we rebounded. It would be close in the final minutes of the game. JJ McCarthy, with under 2 minutes to go, though, is intercepted by Alex Anzalone, and Detroit, for the 2nd straight year, ends our season with a one-and-done playoff appearance. McCarthy's postseason debut did not go well. He was intercepted twice in this game, and we'd go on to see the Steelers win the Super Bowl behind MVP Justin Fields. 2 years into the rebuild, 2 playoff appearances, but no wins. We do not bring back Elijah Mitchell, as I wanted to see what else we could do at the running back spot. We don't bring back Ivan Pace, as he didn't want to return. We were losing a decent bit of that initial roster, with players just not wanting to sign back with the Vikings. I did want to get a couple deals done here with players like Jawan Jennings, who were really good the year prior, and also Stephon Gilmore wanted to come back for another season. So when I began this rebuild, I assumed it would kind of be one and done, or maybe 7 games and done, and here he is now signed on for another season. Jawan Jennings does get a 1-year offer. He comes back, putting our offense in a pretty good situation entering free agency. We had Tajay Spears. We had an offensive line that could use some work on the interior. I didn't re-sign Garrett Bradbury, so there was a chance that Cameron Peake would ultimately start. And then on the defensive side, I was still just looking for high upside, good players. There were still many normal development players we could try to replace. And in free agency, we see Tyron Smith, DeMarcus Lawrence as available players, but I was focused more on some younger talent. Jamison Williams, I knew would be a bit of a long shot, but I gave him a 3-year offer anyway. And if I see Kyle Pitts is going to be a free agent, then we're definitely going to get in on the talks there. But so many other teams interested. He wanted nothing to do with us. Still, I had to at least get denied. I had also given out offers to Grady Jarrett, Harrison Phillips, and David Edwards. And of those 5, we only get Phillips and Edwards to sign. Jamison Williams chooses Philly, DeMarcus Lawrence goes there as well, while Kyle Pitts ultimately decides on the Tennessee Titans. So a rough start to this free agent period, did not get a big upgrade of any kind. We then pivot to Derrick Henry as an option to be that counterpart with Tajay Spears again, but they would swap roles. We offered a contract to Danielle Hunter for a potential return. That didn't work out, but we do sign Jordan Whitehead, Derrick Henry, and also bring in Zach Sealer to help give us another defensive line starter. I continued to offer to a bunch of veterans like Jadeveon Clowney. We had plenty of cap space, so these moves were pretty simple, but they're not moves that are going to dramatically change the course of the team. I still wanted to bring in another interior offensive lineman. There's plenty of room for a wide receiver at the same time. And then on the defense, you still have a D-line that isn't spectacular, but does have solid starters now. I did give a contract offer to McCole Hardman just because those speedy guys can simulate some big plays for your offense. And we do ultimately get him on a 2-year deal as we beat out Buffalo. After selecting at 24 originally after our first season, we were set to pick at 20 this time around. With our scouting, I was still heavily focused on defense with D linemen, but also wide receivers to try and replace Jordan Addison. Ideally, if we could do that in rounds 2 or 3, it would be nice. But watching the board fall at 20 overall, there wasn't anybody I felt I had to trade up for this time around, as we had scouted safeties as well, and luckily, a top 5 talent slips to us this year. It is Sal Diaz, the strong safety. So we move up for a high ceiling corner in Season 1's draft, and then we go and add a safety to the defense. Huge secondary upgrades, and very lucky to go and get top 5 talents without having top 5 or even top 10 selections. We were nailing these secondary picks. Next up, I had been eyeing tight end Bryson Anderson. It was kind of a luxury pick, but he looked to have a really good ceiling. Those A grades had me really intrigued. F injury was a little bit scary. And then, although I didn't have more than 60%, it wasn't tough to see that Trevor Flowers had a really high ceiling at defensive tackle. But the Bears would ultimately take Anderson at 34, and we just let the board come to us at 52, and with Flowers still on the board, that made this option pretty easy. We had a receiver available in Nazir O'Neal. We knew we had round 1 to 2 talent. But again, this just came down to best player available for me. I thought O'Neal was fine as like a number 2 option, but I didn't take him here. I traded down with San Francisco to go from 52 to 63, and Flowers was still there late second round. His athleticism to me gave him an edge, A awareness, run stopping, pass rush skill, and we're talking about a top 10 talent taken at the bottom of the second round. Another hidden development, high upside player to add to this defense. I love the start I had drafting to build a new defense for Minnesota. I then looked to trade up in the 3rd round, up a handful of spots. We sacrifice a 4th. And although Nazir O'Neal is still available, I go with guard Chris Porter. You can get really good guards these days in rounds 2, 3, sometimes 4. Another hidden development pick. The hidden dev luck was incredible in this rebuild. Porter gives us a day 1 starter, and we still had the opportunity to move up for Nazir O'Neal. He had higher talent than his projection, yet he slips even further than his projection. This doesn't happen all that often. Projected at 67, goes at 75, but actually has 48 true talent. And guess what? Another hidden development player. I don't know if I've ever had luck quite like this. Later in the 6th round, I'm looking for a new punter. It cuts to an entire cutscene. Theo Bullard, hidden dev punter now. I just couldn't miss in these drafts. Another great class to help rebuild the Minnesota Vikings. 4 position players, 70 or above. We do miss out on Bryson Anderson, who could have been a replacement for TJ Hawkinson, but I wasn't sure replacing him was even a good idea. Instead, 1st round, Sal Diaz, 81 overall safety. He can really do it all. And then Trevor Flowers. We just let a well-rounded, strong, athletic D lineman fall way further than he ever should have. And I was taking some chances on guys I didn't have complete grades on or anything. Chris Porter, a better pass protector than run blocker, but that would help out JJ, along with Nazir O'Neal to help replace Addison. And who doesn't love a hidden dev punter with 99 kick power? I had also drafted Nate Reynolds to be a backup to TJ Hawkinson at 67 overall. Looking for this year's mentor quarterback, we bring in Derek Carr. And now we have 6 focus player slots unlocked and a ton of great options there to get some extra development. Spending more of the coach points, we're able to get additional XP for upgrading quarterbacks and then defensive tackles that would help out Flowers. So here's the roster after 2 off seasons. Now we've got JJ Spears. He's still only 25 years old. We upgrade the offensive line with Cam Porter. And defensively, in just 2 years, there have already been 5 hidden dev rookies added to the defense at all 3 levels. I was excited to see where this would all go. Now, this was a work in progress still. You draft the players, you still have to develop them. The Vikings didn't get off to a great start to the year with a 2-3 record, and by the trade deadline, we were 3-3, with an offense that was underperforming and a defense that was doing a bit better. The offense seemed to be taking a step back, with the running game not as productive as it was, especially in the beginning with Aaron Jones. And for some reason, Justin Jefferson's production was way down, with Mecole Hardman as our leading receiver. The defense was off to a good start, and the good news here was that Dallas Turner was on pace to set career highs in all categories in a Year 3 breakout. With this 3-3 record, though, I felt like the decision at center wasn't paying off, and it was time to look for a more serious upgrade. Connor Williams, 81 overall, easier to acquire these players in the lower 80s. We package a 3, a 7, and leading receiver Mecole Hardman to upgrade at center. I felt like after getting O'Neal, we didn't even need Hardman that badly. I'd rather play with him, JJ, and Jennings. So I was hoping that by getting Connor Williams, it would unlock our running game a little bit better. And immediately after was our best game so far on the year, putting up 45 points, running for $150. JJ had 3 touchdowns and no interceptions. And this move seemed to give us a good deal of momentum as we won that game and then our following 2. 6-3 Minnesota, but with injuries popping up for Derrick Henry and linebacker Isaiah Beckham. The Vikings would be 8-6 late in the year going into Week 16, with the offense now top 10 in scoring, but the defense then slipping. Very inconsistent there by Minnesota. We had a chance to play ourselves back into the playoffs again. I was hoping to make JJ Spears our running back of the future. I wanted to sign him. Wasn't successful in that attempt. And then with Dayo Odenigbo, we do sign him back with how successful he's been. The following week, we see JJ Spears tear his pec, and he is out for the season. And this happens amidst him putting together the best season of his career. 4 yards a carry, 6 touchdowns, a chance to get over 1,000 yards. But we've got to go to free agency then and sign Jaleel McLaughlin to complement Derrick Henry, who will become the starter at age 32. Minnesota would go on a late season slide with the offense struggling, the defense not doing nearly enough. We lose in overtime to Chicago 20-17. Derrick Henry, not the same player he once was. And then in Week 18, we lose again to Buffalo. And the Vikings, who were once 6-3, end up 8-9, dropping their final 4. And of course, missing the postseason altogether. JJ's numbers were not as good as they were in year 1, but he's still developing. 2 seasons of actually playing into his career, and he's gone up 15 overall. He's now a mid-tier starter. JJ Spears had a pretty good season, but now he was going to be a free agent. After a quiet start to the year, Justin Jefferson ends up with exceptional numbers, while Jauan Jennings was again very good. Nazir O'Neal, just 531 yards, 1 touchdown. That's not awful production, but it's not going to take him up significantly in overall. On the defensive side, Dallas Turner, 9.5 sacks, while 9 for Dayo Odenigbo, another successful season for him. The Jonathan Grenard signing hadn't really been paying off for us. And then Trevor Flowers, only 3 sacks as a rookie. That wasn't going to put him in the mix for Rookie of the Year. We had 2 interceptions for Isaiah Beckham, but not as many turnovers overall as the first couple years. We missed out on Offensive Rookie of the Year. O'Neal comes in 3rd, while Flowers comes in only 6th on defense. I was happy to see Chris Porter get some pretty good development this year. The offensive line was looking pretty good, like one piece away from being one of the best. And then on defense, the D-line is still a bit of a weakness, but Odenbo and Flowers are two really good players, and Dallas Turner played himself up to superstar development just in time, too, because this was the season we'd have to decide on fifth-year options for he and JJ. And those two have made those decisions really easy with these seasons. We're going to pick up both of those options, which means we have one more season in this rebuild until cap becomes a bit of a concern. JJ's cap jumps from 5.8 to 48 in 2028. I hadn't really been making the most of our cap space to this point, so I knew in this coming offseason I had to try doing a bit more. I wanted to bring back Tyjae Spears. He's going to test free agency. Brian O'Neill, he doesn't want to come back. But we have the franchise tag, so we were able to bring him back anyway. But many of these players we do not ultimately re-sign, including Jawan Jennings. Now we have Nazir O'Neill that can kind of take his place. So we just end up using the franchise tag and going into free agency with over $100 million to potentially spend. I felt like if we could find one more offensive lineman, that would be great. But with Spears now a free agent and no standout number 2, O'Neill lost his star dev, a playmaker made a lot of sense. Defensively, we had a lot of good young players continuing to develop from one year to the next. A pass rusher, though, felt like it made a lot of sense. We do give a contract offer to Tyjae Spears when nobody else was with him injured. Then I see Rashad Bateman available. I thought that would be a really good addition for us. He was producing pretty well in Baltimore. We offer him a 3-year contract. A lot of teams wanted to bring him in. And then, just as we did with Odenbo in that first offseason, Myles Murphy available. 25 years old, could still have his best football ahead of him, so we end up offering him a 2-year contract. Very similar. We end up getting Spears and Murphy, as Bateman ends up going to play with Josh Allen in Buffalo instead. Free agency didn't really give us that big upgrade opportunity, so I looked at the draft, I looked at possible trades. In this draft, I was eyeing playmaker to see if there was someone that could easily step in to make an impact. And I considered making a trade for a playmaker, but those trades get so expensive. But one player I felt made a lot of sense for us was defensive lineman Kobe Turner from the Rams. He is an 84 overall player, star dev, 28 years old. I felt like he would really complete our defensive line while upgrading our pass rush, and we could handle absorbing his contract. We wouldn't have to give up a first-round pick either. I had to give up a decent bit in this trade, but it was a second-round pick, a future 3, and a future 6 while getting back a 7. Kobe Turner is our big defensive upgrade. Unfortunately, this isn't like real life where you have a bunch of veterans on massive deals that you can get for like a 5th round pick. So spending all of our cap space was near impossible, but I felt like we were still getting a lot of good players, a lot of upgrades. We then signed Hollywood Brown and Mike Hilton, more veterans to help complete the roster going into the draft. I said playmaker was our focus earlier. It was actually more so tackle. I had also scouted some secondary players, but tackle was the position that stood out in the first round. I had 3 right tackles all really clustered on the board with round 1 to 2 talent. So I felt really good about being able to move back and get a starting lineman. And that's ultimately what we did. With the Buffalo Bills moving up from 22 to 14, we get their 3rd round pick, which helps after the Kobe Turner trade, and we let the board fall to us with only one of those 3 tackles going off the board. From there, I just had to pick one of the 2 tackles, and we had one at 21 years old, one at 22. But ultimately, the tiebreaker for me was the injury concerns, And then the run block power being a bit higher for Ron McPherson. And he is our first round pick this year. We went secondary a couple years, but now I really wanted to give JJ that great offensive line. And once again, hidden development on Ron McPherson. We still had picks at 86 and then 110. And to me, the 4th round pick is a good tool for just making that 3rd round pick more valuable. We jump up a handful of spots with the Arizona Cardinals. That allows us to go and get safety Kalen Jones, who had round 1 to 2 talent. We get him in the 3rd round. Good athletes, really good man coverage, and B awareness. A bit of a luxury pick, but Kalen Jones also has hidden development, and I had a plan for how he would be utilized. Now, in going through the draft here in Madden 25, you get these cutscenes all the time, and half the time I'm getting faked out because I think I just drafted another hidden dev game changer, when in reality I just had a massive reach. It was a 4-player draft class, but at this stage the roster felt like it was built up enough for those smaller classes and condensing for better players. My plan with Ron McPherson was to play him at guard, ultimately replacing Brian O'Neill once he was no longer on the team. For Kalen Jones, it was to play him as a slot corner. He has that hybrid skill set and hidden development. Secondary got even scarier. We then signed Geno Smith as the mentor quarterback, and a lot of veterans because we had the cap space and we just had room for more backups. Ramondre Stevenson, Josh Oliver, a reunion with Andrew Van Ginkel, Eric Armstead coming to Minnesota, and even safety Chuck Clark. Here's the roster now going into the 4th year. McPherson at left guard made this a really stout offensive line. I wanted it to work out with Tyjae Spears. I wanted to develop that Minnesota ground game, and then on defense, it's looking a lot better than it was in the very beginning. Kobe Turner, Trevor Flowers, Dio Odenbo. I'm happy with that D-line. And all these hidden dev players I've had in the secondary. I really liked the build. I then spent the coaching points on upgrading the offensive line tree here, because that's kind of a force multiplier for the whole offense. And what do? Go off to a dominant 5-0 start. Now, the defense was outplaying the offense at this point. We lose TJ Hawkinson. I choose to replace him with Gerald Everett. And JJ McCarthy, 9 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. It's good production so far. Now an 86 overall, which is good enough to have him around number 12 for league ranking. We did lose our 6th game to Dallas, however. JJ had a bad game. The run game still wasn't quite where I expected it to be. And the receiving core looked to be in pretty good shape with Jefferson, Hollywood Brown, and Nazir O'Neal. The defense was paving the way for our great start as Kobe Turner had 5 sacks to lead the team. It felt like all the investment was paying off. Even Kalen Jones had 2 interceptions early in this season. He has star development. And then the offensive line only allowing 3 sacks in a handful of games. Ron McPherson revealed to also have star development. This time at the trade deadline, I was really intrigued with the idea of adding another playmaker. And for a little bit, I really fell in love with the idea of going to get Bijan Robinson from the struggling Atlanta Falcons. But it's just so difficult to trade for stars like Bijan, especially if you're not including players in the deal. Like a 1st round pick at 32 overall, projected is not moving the needle nearly enough. So I move on then to Kyle Pitts. I guess I like the Falcons playmakers a lot, but it's just not going anywhere unless you give up way too much, and I'm just not making those deals. It did feel inefficient to have so much cap space left on the table and to not make upgrades, but I felt like I had to use the picks we had to upgrade the roster. I didn't have a lot of extra picks or players that were expendable to make those kind of moves that teams on rookie quarterback contracts do. Now, the Vikings would start 5-0, but then the defense would completely regress. They allowed under 20 points their first 5 games, then allowed 30 plus for 3. They had a 5-game win streak and a 5-game losing streak. This team's got an identity crisis. I didn't even know what to think, starting 5-0 and going 5-6. Losing Isaiah Beckham to an ankle injury. It's always bizarre here with Minnesota. The previous season had a 6-3 collapse. This year is a 5-0 collapse. We missed the playoffs with an 8-9 record. To start so well defensively, and then to regress without a major injury as the catalyst, I don't know what happened here other than it's just Minnesota football at its best. Offense took a step back. How are we bottom 10 in points allowed and points against? And I knew the cap space situation was about to become a little more difficult as we had 5th-year options for Dallas Turner and JJ McCarthy. We end up re-signing TJ Hawkinson, Byron Murphy. This is risky to just run back a team that had 2 straight collapses, but I re-signed those valuable players that could have left in free agency. I knew I had to do something to get JJ back on track for the following year, as he was now an 88th overall, number 12 quarterback in the league. It didn't feel like Tyjae Spears was enough of a game changer for this offense. Another year, he goes under 4 yards a carry. The run game is not nearly as good as I want it to be, and the passing game, despite 2,000-yard receivers, is still missing something. Trevor Flowers takes a good leap. Kobe Turner, 9.5 sacks. 2 interceptions for Kalen Jones. I felt like playmaker was still something to look at. The defense had developed tremendously well. We had Youngblood and Turner, now superstar dev. We had Kalen Jones get to superstar because he won Rookie of the Year. With the defense, a lot of it was just trusting the process with all these hidden dev starters that they would continue developing and just naturally improve the team. I felt like I had to be more active in upgrading the offense because the pieces weren't as young. The Chiefs beat the 49ers again in the Super Bowl. And after missing the postseason, we would pick at 15, the highest we've picked in the NFL draft. I picked up the 5th-year option on Spencer Youngblood. That's an easy decision. But you can see where cap is starting to creep up on us, and it's no longer just having all the cap space to spend. The clock was ticking with this current build. I do franchise tag Brian O'Neill a second time to keep that offensive line intact. We then have to lose out on Will Reichard, who ends up testing free agency. So we're looking for a new kicker. But what stood out to me in free agency was seeing Christian McCaffrey available, still an 86 overall. His production has been outstanding. And he, of course, adds that receiving back element to the team. I like having 2 really good running backs, and I think that your offense sims a lot better when your running back room is deep. We were the only team to offer to CMC in the first stage. We then offered to kicker Cameron Dicker. And at wide receiver now, you've got some intriguing guys becoming free agents. Star dev on Adonai Mitchell at 80 overall, 25 years old. I've been taking those chances on 25-year-old free agents in this rebuild. I was going to continue that to see if Mitchell could further break out and add another good piece to this offense. 3 players we focus on, and we do sign CMC and Adonai Mitchell. Later getting Cameron Dicker, we go 3 for 3 with $20 million in cap space still remaining. I felt like I was going to have to use most of that to fill out some depth, but I felt really good about both sides of the football and all the starters that we had. This team is looking really good on paper, especially because of those secondary draft picks. Now, as I looked at the NFL draft, I had been scouting receiver in this year, but it felt like so many of the players had lower talent than projected. Plus, we had already picked up A.D. Mitchell and CMC, so a playmaker in the draft wasn't a huge priority and wouldn't make a huge difference. I didn't have a lot of information on pass rusher or other players that would also make sense. So we end up signing Tommy Tremble here to a deal to give us a backup tight end, and now we're under $10 million in cap space. We then signed Jordan Travis to be our backup quarterback. But when it came to the draft, I ended up in a situation where there wasn't anybody I wanted to trade up for, and I wasn't sure if taking a player with 60% scouting would be the right call this time. I like Jeremy Irons, didn't trade up for him at 12, so when we were on the clock, I looked at this board and I said, get me out of here. I just want to move out of the first round entirely. My thought was partially that cap space was going to become an issue, and if I could invest in picks for 2029, which we get a 1 and a 2, along with a 2030 third, then I might be able to replace some lost players in the following season. Now, in the second round, I had a chance to trade up for running back Daniel Turner. He was one of my private workout players pre-draft. But again, I don't trade up, and he goes to Chicago. So instead, in the second round, I decided to take a chance here on an offensive lineman. A, awareness usually catches my attention. B, pass block. Ultimately, this was a reach for Damian Southward. We take him at 47. He had 88 in true talent. Normal development. My luck runs out on all the hidden dev picks. Later, we take Silas Monk at wide receiver to add some more depth. This pick is at 111. It is a good value. He has normal development. But this is the least remarkable class so far of the rebuild, only taking 4 players. My hope with Southward was that he would have higher overall than this and maybe be a starter in his second year. But I probably would have been better off just moving up with those 2 picks to go get Daniel Turner. Not that it was even important, because now we had Tyjae Spears along with CMC. So we go into free agency, or preseason rather, and still adding free agents, including Danielle Hunter. Nice to have him back. And here's our team going into a new season after back-to-back playoff misses. A.D. Mitchell, CMC as big upgrades. On defense, not a lot had changed. I was really relying on the players we already had and trusting it would all work out. And this would ultimately lead us into the biggest year of the rebuild, because Justin Jefferson, Dallas Turner, JJ McCarthy, and others were set to be free agents at the end of the season. Re-signing all these players might be possible, but wouldn't leave a whole lot of cap space left for a lot of the role players and some of the players from even that first draft class. So, this was going to be the biggest season of all. We opened 2-0, putting up big points on the Bucks and then on Chicago. 31-23 is the final. 3 scores from JJ McCarthy versus Caleb Williams and the Bears. A.D. Mitchell has 77 yards and a score, while defensively, we have 2 sacks for Kobe Turner. Trevor Flowers and A.D. Mitchell both get hurt early in this season. I had injury on this rebuild, by the way, set to 40, so that was going to be more of a factor. We open 4-0 as JJ faces his old teammate Sam Darnold with the Cowboys. Darnold throws 4 interceptions, 2 to Sal Diaz and 2 to Isaiah Beckham. The Vikings are off to as hot of a start as they were the year before, but now they were doing it with significantly more offense. 42-9 against Chicago. What a lopsided matchup this ended up being. We got Jimmy Smart going for 100 plus and a touchdown in this game. And on defense, interceptions for Youngblood, Murphy, and I even brought back Mekhi Blackman for this season. The Vikings opened 6-0 going into the trade deadline with the number 1 scoring offense and the number 2 scoring defense. I did not have a lot of cap space at this point to make any more upgrades. But evaluating the team at this point, it was clear JJ Spears was outplaying Christian McCaffrey. Justin Jefferson is still incredible. Jimmy Smart, our second leading receiver. And defensively, Kobe Turner was a great addition for us. The safeties were still taking the football away. Odenbo, 4.5 sacks. So we swapped CMC and Spears. And I tried to get some of these deals done, beginning with JJ McCarthy. 5 years, $250+ million. That's not gonna do it. How about Justin Jefferson? 5 years, $200 million. He says no. We sim through week 8, another win over Miami. We come back, now offering 7 years to JJ, and he denies that contract. Justin Jefferson, now $205 million will get it done. We then go to Dallas Turner next. He's looking for massive money at 25 years old. We sign him to an extension. We then lose to the Houston Texans. And in that game, Adonai Mitchell tears his MCL, and he is out for the season. We place him on injured reserve. Now, to make any free agent additions, I had to clear cap space. We restructured JJ Spears to make it possible to bring back Hollywood Brown to replace him. We sim through the following game in Week 10. The Vikings do beat the Packers again, but we lose 2 more players. Kalen Jones, 4 weeks. TJ Hawkinson, 6 weeks. But still, Minnesota is that number 1 seed, running away with the NFC North. Simming through Week 16. Vikings 11-4, another injury to JJ Spears. Another season ender with a torn pec. And we have to put him on IR again. And this was the year I had been waiting for from him. So then I released Tommy Tremble. I have to eat dead money, just a free 1.8, so we can sign Najee Harris, who was the best running back in free agency, to now partner up with Christian McCaffrey. The Vikings do win the number 1 seed in the NFC with a 12-5 record, 1 better than Dallas. And the NFC is looking really rough these days, just 3 teams with double-digit wins. But Minnesota loses another player. Connor Williams tears his hamstring. That's 3 offensive starters now missing from this team going into the postseason. We've got Peak back as the starting center. Thankfully, this defense was still at full strength and had developed into one of the league's best. In this season, JJ McCarthy had the best season of his career to this point, with 46 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Developing him without his rookie year went much better than expected. The run game was certainly better, and might have been even stronger had JJ Spears stayed healthy the entire season. Justin Jefferson, 25 touchdowns, 1,500 plus yards. Nazir O'Neal, our second leading receiver this season. And defensively, Kobe Turner, 11 sacks. 8 more for Dayo Odenbo. Who would have thought that would have been one of the most impactful signings here in this series? The defense was fantastic. Youngblood, Diaz, 4 picks each. Jones gets 3. The Vikings end up with JJ McCarthy 8th in MVP voting, which is still pretty darn impressive. And then Justin Jefferson wins Offensive Player of the Year. JJ is named Best Quarterback. And the Vikings get the 1 seed and a matchup with 6 seed Detroit. After they knocked us out in the wild card round the first 2 years of this rebuild, we've got the Lions again. But now we're far stronger than those first 2 meetings. Again, it's close going into those late minutes, and Detroit takes an 8-point lead with less than 5 minutes to go. JJ McCarthy trying to lead the Viking offense down the field. Takes them into the red zone with TJ Hawkinson. And the Vikings score on a Najee Harris touchdown catch. And JJ runs in the 2-point try. This game goes to overtime. Detroit fails to score on the very first possession. All the Vikings need then is a field goal. 20 yards there from JJ to JJ. And the Vikings do get into field goal range again with Jefferson. And Cameron Dicker kicks the game winner in overtime. And at last, we've got the first playoff win of the rebuild, sending the Vikings to the NFC Championship game, where I don't have a lot of very good memories in my time as a Viking fan. McCarthy was much better in this matchup compared to his first playoff meeting against the Lions, but what happened in this game is Christian McCaffrey left with injury, leaving Najee Harris to handle 15 carries, 9 receptions, and scoring, ultimately, that critical touchdown at the end. The Vikings do punch their ticket to the NFC Championship to meet Tampa Bay, and McCaffrey's injury was not serious, but it did obviously impact that game. I then failed to re-sign McCarthy ahead of the NFC title game as the Vikings meet the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, they're a team that's changed a lot in this rebuild with Baker Mayfield not there, Mike Evans gone, Chris Godwin gone. They had a second-year quarterback in Devontae Tyson, an 83 overall with a bright future. Bucky Irving, Braden Singleton is their number 1 receiver now. But this Tampa Bay team is simply not ready for this version of the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota got out to a big lead early and never let Tampa get back in this game. JJ McCarthy, 300-plus yards, 5 passing touchdowns as Minnesota wins it 42-14. Punching their ticket to the Super Bowl for the first time in the rebuild and the first time since the 1970s. 51 seasons between Super Bowl appearances, but they get back finally by drafting the highest drafted quarterback in team history. McCarthy was taken at 10th overall. Vikings have never taken a quarterback higher. And in this NFC title game, another injury pops up, and now we're without franchise tackle Christian Darrisaw. That's 4 injuries affecting the offense as we have a Super Bowl against the Indianapolis Colts. Josh Downs is now their number 1 rated player. I did not expect to see that. But Anthony Richardson, Quentin Nelson, they absolutely hit on this pick for Keelan McMichael, an 86 overall cornerback as a rookie, getting a boost to an 89. This is a really nice team. I'm not surprised that by the time we made it to a Super Bowl, they were the opponents. So now we had to replace 2 offensive linemen, and both of those replacements were taken on day 3 of our first draft of that rebuild. So everything coming full circle. I also moved McPherson out to left tackle to replace Darrisaw. And this meant that our Super Bowl team would feature 5 unique starters from that first draft, including 7th round guard James Hills. Nearly the last pick in the draft, now starting in a Super Bowl. I thought this was one of the coolest things of the rebuild, to see Kalen Jones turn into an X factor within 2 years. A 3rd round pick hitting this big is not something I'm usually pulling off in my franchises. Pretty good use of a 3rd round pick there. 5 interceptions in 2 years for Kalen Jones. And a part of a Super Bowl defense now as we take on the Indianapolis Colts. I knew this was going to be tough facing Anthony Richardson after years of development with really good pieces in that Colts offense. Not surprised to see Anthony Richardson in this spot. First quarter, Vikings driving down a 22-yarder to TJ Hawkinson, and Hollywood Brown catches a 10-yard touchdown. The Colts take over. Dallas Turner sacks Anthony Richardson to get us the football, but then they get a stop with Chris Jones now a part of that Colt defense. Indianapolis eventually drives down, and Jonathan Taylor catches a touchdown to tie the game. Nazir O'Neal would take us down into the red zone here late first half, but 2 sacks would keep us from scoring a touchdown. And the Colts would then, before halftime, drive down in a flash and take the lead. 14-13 third quarter. JJ has the Vikings on the move with CMC running us into the red zone and Nazir O'Neal catching a touchdown. But let's go into the fourth quarter. Vikings up 7. Anthony Richardson, you know he's going to let it fly. That pass is incomplete for Michael Pittman. And on 3rd and 4, Richardson deep downfield to Josh Downs. And the Colts enter the red zone facing 3rd and 2. They do get a conversion. Isaiah Likely is now the tight end in Indy. And with Richardson, you know he's dangerous outside the pocket. He rolls out and runs in for 6, tying the game at 21. 7 and change to go in the ball game. JJ McCarthy on target for Hollywood Brown. Of course, replacing Adonai Mitchell, playing a key role in the offense. Then CMC, now 32 or 33 years old, still getting it done for us. And you knew you'd see Jefferson eventually matched up on a linebacker on a drag route. That is a big a mismatch as you can have. And on 1st and 10, Jefferson makes the catch. What a throw from McCarthy, putting the Vikings back on top. 28-21. That leaves a lot of time, though, for Anthony Richardson. And we saw how good he looked on that last drive. He hits Michael Pittman over the middle here for a first down. Couple plays later, they get to 3rd and 10. And that's when the Vikings pass rush gets through, and Richardson still finds a conversion to Michael Pittman. 4 and change left. The run defense for Minnesota kept Jonathan Taylor from having a huge impact in this game. 3rd down and 12. Minnesota with a 4-man rush. They collapse the pocket on Richardson and sack him with Kobe Turner. Colts have to give us the football. Minnesota trying to put it away. McCarthy for Hollywood. And that is a Viking first down inside of 3 minutes. Close to putting this game away, but McCaffrey can't get to the edge. It's 3rd and 5. Game potentially on the line for Indy, and they stuff CMC, ensuring another drive for Anthony Richardson. 1:36 to go. Colts out of timeouts. A laser to the outside. That gets them into Viking territory. Under a minute now. Another good ball from Richardson. Colts driving 36 seconds, and Richardson is intercepted. It's picked by Byron Murphy and the Minnesota Vikings in year 5 of this rebuild. Top the Indianapolis Colts, and they've won a Super Bowl at last. The rebuild is successful. What a way to get it done. JJ McCarthy going toe-to-toe with Anthony Richardson. It's one big defensive play in the end separating these two teams. I felt like in years 3, 4, and 5 of this rebuild, our window was wide open. I was prepared for it to not work out this year. We had basically punted on the previous draft and still end up going to the Super Bowl and winning it. I felt like I was kind of failing the rebuild a bit, not making those aggressive moves we've seen from the Rams and the Buccaneers in their Super Bowl pursuits in recent years. But I was able to make sure our early picks were on high upside defensive players. This Vikings defense has needed that talent influx now for a while, and I was able to give them that pretty much from day one in this rebuild and just let things develop, trust that process. And there we go. By 2028, McCarthy has been developed. He is a Super Bowl MVP, and the Vikings are champs. I even brought back Danielle Hunter. He gets a ring. McCarthy developed extremely well. I made sure that offensive line was going to be very strong. Of course, you got Justin Jefferson that makes everything much easier. TJ Hawkinson. It was risky to make the move of trading Jordan Addison, but that was something I thought I would do from the very start of the rebuild, because I knew the Vikings needed more picks and it was more crucial to upgrade the defense in a big way. Well, I felt like if we had, a top tight end, a top receiver, I could fill in the blanks, and Nazir O'Neal helped us do that. What I wasn't expecting is that moves that would have such a huge impact would be trading for Kobe Turner and then signing Dayo Odenbo. Usually you think it's going to be like drafting a high upside, X Factor, or superstar defensive lineman, but I think I made some good free agent decisions, and the draft was usually used to boost that secondary. So it's a very strong build, I think, for Minnesota by the end of these 5 years. I added 4 secondary players that are all at least superstar development, along with boosting this entire defensive line. It's also a pretty cool situation to go win the Super Bowl and still have these picks for the following year's draft. So I wasn't going to just end the rebuild right there after winning, because I wanted to see one more offseason. What could I do with those picks, and what would be the ultimate cap situation for Minnesota? So I did continue a bit further, and I wanted to sign JJ McCarthy long term, and I offered him a large 7-year contract, which he turned down. I had to franchise tag him at $71.5 million. But this team was now in a bind because of that, with so many players in the last year of their deal, limited chances to even restructure contracts, so I really couldn't do anything in free agency, and I had to let a lot of players just walk, including the 2 linebackers I drafted in that first offseason, Brian O'Neill, Dayo Odenbo. So I didn't really do anything in this stage. I was counting on the draft to do all the replacing. And when I simulated too, I was over the cap, so the CPU automatically restructured some of our contracts. And when it came time to the draft, I spent our first pick on a tackle, Isaiah Shepard, who is a normal development player, but still looked like a good startable left tackle. And then late first, again, I don't get the best value, 94 in true talent, but I do get hidden dev on Tom Andrews, who could be a replacement for Dayo Odenbo. George Harris was selected then in the second round, a wide receiver, as I finally get better value, but again, normal development, and then select Matthew Gillespie with that second round pick. So I'm no longer getting that same hidden dev luck, but I do come back later and I draft Terrell Grimes, and I see this cutscene play. I'm like, all right, what do we have here? And it's a player ranked 355, but Sidney Grayson hidden dev. I have Mr. Irrelevant, the final pick of the draft. I decide, okay, let's go check out the fullbacks. That guy ran a 4.58. He's our selection. Mr. Irrelevant is a hidden development fullback with 87 speed. I did check his overall at running back. It wasn't great. It was like 55. But hey, pretty good use of the final pick in the draft. Not a huge draft in terms of getting like superstar caliber players, but a good way to replace some of that lost talent. You have those extra picks to line up with the loss of so many veterans. That at least coincided nicely. Would have just been nice to get a bit better value for all those picks. But here were the players that I ultimately did add, and even with normal development, guys like George Harris still to me look like really good startable players, Matthew Gillespie as well. So I would then go and just add a few veterans to round out the team with what cap space I did have. Sam Darnold comes back, and here is the team for the Super Bowl title defense year. Offensive line, not much different, but no Brian O'Neill, and defensively, it did change a lot at linebacker, but the core secondary pieces are there. The defensive line outside of Odenbo is there, and I replaced him with a first-round pick. But the Vikings will get off to an awful start, as it appeared that what we lost on defense was just too much. This would be an 8-9 campaign. We would play much better in the second half, but still lose far too many games and end up with another missed season. Our worst year in this rebuild was ultimately 8-9, which it happened 3 times. It feels like a coin flip at times when you're going to have a good year or a mediocre season. The roster doesn't change a lot. You still put up good numbers offensively, but defense seems to carry a bit of variance in terms of the points and turnovers that you generate. And I want to add too, I kept this rebuild on the Vikings offense and defensive playbooks and whatever their default schemes were. I never even went into that menu in this rebuild. I only focused on the roster and the skill trees for coaches. So the defense got good development this year. I just think that it was in a little bit worse spot early on, and it didn't sim very nicely having a couple lower rated starters than the years before. The team overall had definitely dropped. I believe we're peaking at a 92 or 93. So the Bills win the Super Bowl after this season. And the last thing I wanted to do was just try to get McCarthy under contract and then do a longer term sim and see what would ultimately happen. I signed McCarthy, but I was not so lucky in signing other players like Spencer Youngblood. High interest in coming back, but still turned down our offer and went elsewhere in free agency. I was surprised that even with a good team, that it was still tough to have players interested. But close to home, the tax-free state, the warm weather are always going to be things that probably work against Minnesota in general. So team success, coach win percentage can only carry so much. I then put everything on automatic and decided, okay, do what you gotta do, game. I gave you JJ McCarthy's new contract, and let's see what ultimately happens. The offensive line definitely regressed for the next season, and the D-line isn't even recognizable now. As we lose Flowers, we lose Kobe Turner, the secondary at cornerback, I didn't think this would be a good defense at all. And what would happen? An 11-6 year as we make the playoffs. 84 overall defense, 88 overall offense. We certainly lean on that strength here, as JJ McCarthy ends up with 39 touchdowns to 7 INTs. Tyjae Spears has an inefficient 1,000-yard season, but Nazir O'Neal breaks out nearly 1,200 yards receiving to complement Justin Jefferson. You don't often see that receiver year 5 breakout, but that's what happened in this case. 100 plus catches as well. And then nobody had more than 3.5 sacks. How do you end up with no one at least falling into 4? You play 1,000 snaps, you gotta get 4 sacks eventually. This team would go to the Super Bowl. But why not the year before? That team was in way better shape than this one. Vikings do not win the division, but they go through the wild card round, win twice on the road, beat the Bucs again, and then in the Super Bowl against the 15-2 Jaguars. Minnesota beats them by 17. So I guess technically a second Super Bowl title here for the rebuild, although I didn't handle the offseason prior to this one. But with JJ McCarthy developing, there was a wide open title window. He threw 4 touchdowns in this game to Super Bowl MVP, Justin Jefferson. JJ develops pretty well in Madden, it appears, even when he misses that rookie season. Comes back with star dev, 22 years old, running that Kevin O'Connell offense. With Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and a good offensive line, you can still develop JJ into one of the league's best and a 2-time Super Bowl winning quarterback. From there, I just said, all right, sim 10 years, what happens? We put together those 2 Super Bowl teams, and from there, the Vikings would not return to the Super Bowl again. That would be it in the JJ McCarthy era. Tampa Bay actually built a little bit of a dynasty here. We faced them and knocked them out in 2 NFC title games, but they would eventually get to multiple Super Bowls, winning 3 in the next decade. They had Devontae Tyson turn into one of the best quarterbacks in the league and the highest paid, with a cap hit at just under $100 million. JJ McCarthy would leave Minnesota after 16 years in the NFL. It was a pretty good run, and he was still an 85 overall at age 37. He would throw for over 500 touchdowns in a Viking uniform. I wanted to go through the legacy scores and see if I could go and find a bunch of players that I had drafted, but a lot of those players just get deleted from these lists. It keeps some of the top guys, and then everybody else is just kind of wiped from the record books here. So that's disappointing that I can't do like a 10-year sim and then go find that info. But I am still happy with this rebuild. It was successful. I got this team to a championship at last, and I got to do it with that JJ to JJ connection. So, I have not done many videos like this, one-shot rebuilds. I've been wanting to try this out as I'm not doing a big Madden series right now, and definitely let me know what you thought down below in the comments section. Did you like the rebuild being presented this way, where I have it edited and I'm telling you step by step, you know, my thought process and what happened, but it cuts out a lot of the filler this way and allowed me to just kind of casually do the rebuild and then piece it together to make this video. I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching the video. Please leave your feedback, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see what else I come up with here in Madden this year. Take care, everyone.